Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Cooking with Plants. This month, we are focused on plant-forward baking. I'm Kelly Wilson. I am a registered dietitian and board-certified lifestyle medicine practitioner out of Trinity Health Ann Arbor. If you're not familiar with lifestyle medicine, it's a medical subspecialty that focuses on 6 key pillars to treat, reverse, and prevent chronic disease and promote whole person health. So we focus on whole food, plant forward dietary pattern, which is a lot of what we cover in this culinary series. We talk to patients about regular physical activity, getting restorative sleep, managing stress in positive ways, developing healthy relationships, and avoiding risky substances. Those are all of the 6 key pillars that make up lifestyle medicine that we use here in our practice to support patients on their journey to whole health. This class, like I said, is focused on that whole food, plant forward dietary pattern. The whole point of the class series is really to make it easier for you to get more of these plant powered foods onto your plates. And I really believe that anybody can cook. I think a lot of times we get intimidated by the kitchen and feel like in order to be able to cook, we have to have fancy equipment or use expensive ingredients. And I'm here to tell you that cooking can be really simple and it can be really easy and it can be fast. It just takes practice. So hopefully over the course of participating in this class and others in this series, you'll develop those culinary muscles so that you can get into the kitchen and add more of these whole foods into your daily meals. And remember too that food is more than nourishment, it's also joy. So try to have some fun with the process as well. And start small if this whole food, plant forward way of eating is new to you. Start with things that are familiar to you. For example, if you really love tacos or you really love pasta with a meat sauce, maybe you swap in the meat, half of the meat for beans or lentils. So one of our classes, we make a black bean taco, or we've used lentils in previous classes to replace some of the meat in a bolognese sauce. So experiment. Start with something that you already love and see how you can kind of up the plant power by adding in some more of these whole plant foods that we talk about in class. And then be patient with yourself. Remember that change takes time and it's not linear. It takes us about 2 months or 66 days to develop a new habit. So patience and persistence is key in order to making the use of these plant-based foods in your daily cooking a habit that you don't even think about. So I'm really excited that you're here. I just want to take care of a couple housekeeping things before we dive into the topic for today. So if you are really interested in having closed captions to help with the audio as you're watching this presentation today, you can go to the 3 little dots on the top toolbar of your screen that say more, select the language and speech, and then if you click turn on live captions, you should see that pop up right then and there for you on the screen. As always, we have a Q&A feature. Everyone's video and microphone is muted, but if you want to ask questions, you can use that Q&A bubble right there. We unfortunately don't have that feature available if you're joining on a phone or a tablet, but if you have a question that we are not able to get to today, please send us an email at lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org, and we'll make sure that you get that question answered. If you are a Trinity Health colleague looking for points to keep your insurance premiums low, please email me at lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org after that you've watched this class with one thing that you learned, and you will get a code for 250 points for your lowered insurance premiums. If you're new to the class or just want a reminder of where we've been, this is the list of all of the topics that we've covered over the course of this year so far. All of these videos from these classes are on the class website, as well as the YouTube and Vimeo pages, which I'll make sure are sent out in the follow-up email after tonight's class. Should you have any questions about those, again, please email that lifestyle medicine email address. And feel welcome to go back and watch any of these videos as often as you would like. And next month will be our last class together of the year, and we'll be focused on some celebration meals that will help us enjoy the end of the year holidays. One final housekeeping note, just a reminder that this is a general nutrition and culinary class. So if you were newly diagnosed with a health condition or have a health condition that you're struggling to manage, you may need more specific nutrition advice and a more intensive approach. So would highly encourage you to reach out to your dietitian and your physician to talk about the dietary changes that are appropriate for you. Now, with that being said, most of the foods that we talk about in this class are whole plant foods, and most folks can benefit from adding those types of foods to their diet. Tonight, we are doing a baking class, so some of these recipes are a little bit higher in sugar because these are foods that we don't eat all of the time. They're occasional celebration, every once in a while foods. So be mindful of that if you're someone who is trying to manage your sugar intake. All right, here is where we're going tonight. We are going to start with a little baking science so that you can understand the purpose of different ingredients in our recipes. And then we're going to talk about some whole food swaps and how that might impact the science that we just learned about. And then we're going to cook through 4 recipes that demonstrate some of those whole food plant-based swaps and hopefully give you some delicious ideas to bring to your next social gathering. So let's start with the science. I think fat is a really common ingredient in a lot of baked goods, and it provides several different functions when we're baking. First and foremost, fat is where a lot of the flavor molecules live. Many of the flavor compounds in our food are fat soluble, so fat can be a carrier of a lot of flavor. Fat is also really important for what's called leavening, which in baking is really just incorporating air into a dish. This is really important for making sure baked goods are light and fluffy and not overly dense. Fat has an important role in maintaining texture of baked goods. If you think about baked goods that have a flour base, flour contains a protein called gluten that is what it forms this matrix that gives baked goods structure. And if that gluten is overmixed, that structure becomes really rigid and tense, and we get really tough baked goods. What happens when we have fat in a baked good that has flour is the fat kind of coats the flour molecules and prevents water from mixing with the flour and prevents some of the formation of that gluten matrix. So we're less likely to have a tough baked good because we're not forming quite as much of that gluten. So fat can help with tenderness. That's also really important for that flaky texture that we're used to in maybe pie crust or croissants. And if you've ever made a pie crust, you often fold in pieces of cold butter, and you get kind of chunks of that butter in the pie crust. That as that butter melts, it leaves behind these air pockets that help lend to the flakiness and the lightness of that crust. Another really important role of fat is adding moisture. I mentioned that the fat coats flour proteins when we're incorporating it into our baked good. And this means that flour is absorbing less moisture, which means that moisture is available to make a moist crumb and add kind of steam to our baked good. It's not just being totally absorbed by the flour. Eggs are another really common animal-based ingredient in our baked good. The white in the egg is mostly water, so they're a significant source of moisture in our baked goods. Like our fat, eggs can also add leavening, so air, to our baked goods. If you think about if you've ever whipped a egg white, and it's gotten foamy and bubbly. So as you're whipping that, you're creating this protein matrix that is trapping all of these air bubbles. Those air bubbles, as you're folding that egg white into your baked good, are adding a lightness to that product. So eggs can be really important for kind of keeping that air trapped in a dish. And then if you're adding the egg white to, say, like, well, actually, you know what? I'm just going to show you later. We're going to do something with aquafaba, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about that as we're adding it to the dish. Eggs also are really important for binding, for keeping things stuck together, and they can help us thicken a dish. If you've ever made a custard, that's an example of the proteins in the eggs coagulating, and that lends to some thickening. And they also have a compound called lectin, which is a great emulsifier. Emulsification is really when fat and water are able to mix together. You think of, if you've ever made like a mayonnaise, that's a great example of an emulsified dish. And eggs play a really critical role in getting the oil and the wet ingredients to mix together. Finally, milk. This is often something we add to baked goods for moisture. We may use something called buttermilk, which is just a soured milk, to introduce some acid, which can activate baking soda, which is a base. And when we mix that acidic buttermilk with the baking soda, it creates carbon dioxide, which is a gas. And that creates leavening. It adds those air bubbles into our dish and creates a lighter, fluffier baked good. This is, we wouldn't probably be using buttermilk if we were going to use something like baking powder, because baking powder is basically just the baking soda with the acid. In the case of a baking powder, it's cream of tartar already mixed together. So we typically use the buttermilk when we're using baking soda in a dish. Milk also plays an important role in browning reaction. So there is some sugar, some lactose in milk. There's protein in milk. And when sugars and proteins are combined together and heated, we get this Maillard reaction, which is an enzymatic browning process when sugar and protein are under heat. So now that we understand a little bit of the science behind some common ingredients in our baking, let's talk through some swaps that we might be able to make. For our fat, if we want to substitute out, say, a butter or an oil and add some more plant-powered ingredients, some things that we could consider would be fruit purees, like an applesauce or a banana. These are going to add moisture and some tenderness. They're going to help decrease that gluten formation we talked about, but they will also add a little less leavening than our traditional fat products. So this would be something we might want to account for by adding more baking soda or baking powder, or considering adding maybe some aquafaba, which we'll talk about in a second, to incorporate some more air. You can also use nut or seed butters in a 1-to-1 ratio. These often have a more distinct flavor than, say, if you were, the recipe calls for a neutral oil like canola or avocado. The nut butter or seed butter is going to have a slightly different flavor. So you just want to make sure that that flavor pairs with the final product that you're hoping to create. And you do also want to keep in mind that the nut or seed butter are going to potentially increase the density of your final product. So you might want to play around with, again, some of the leavening agents to help counteract some of that density, or you might just want to focus on using your nut and seed butters in recipes where it doesn't matter as much if the final product is dense, like in a brownie or a hearty muffin. Avocado can be a really wonderful 1-to-1 substitution for oils or butter in a baked good. It does tend to darken your baked good. So if the visual is really important to you, then consider using avocados with products that are already going to be dark. Like today, we're going to use it in a brownie, for example. For eggs, we've got several different wonderful swaps that we can use to add some more plant foods into our baked goods. So first and foremost is aquafaba. This is a very funny word for the chickpea, the water that comes off of chickpeas. So aqua, water, faba is bean. It's bean water. This starchy liquid works really well as an egg white replacement. It gets foamy, and we'll show an example of that in a few minutes with one of our recipes. And it holds on to a lot of air. You can whip it into like soft peaks, similar to what you would with an egg white. It's really only chickpeas that you can do this with. I think folks have tried with the starchy liquid from other canned beans, and it does not work as well. The science is still out on why exactly it's just chickpeas that work for this, but there is some connection potentially to the saponins in chickpeas, and that may be why that chickpea liquid is especially good at whipping into kind of soapy bubbles. Now, you can see on the screen here, if you wanted to replace a whole egg or an egg white with aquafaba in whatever baked good you're creating, 2 tablespoons equals 1 egg white, 3 tablespoons equals 1 whole egg. You can also use ground flaxseed. This is one that I use all the time. And again, we'll use this in one of our recipes. So if you're not familiar, we'll talk about that. 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed plus 1.5 tablespoons of water mixed together and then let sit for 5 minutes equals an egg. You can use whole chia seeds in a similar ratio for replacing that egg. The chia seeds retain their texture, so there's a little bit more crunch if you're using these. So just make sure if you're going to use those as your egg replacement, that added texture pairs well with the baked good that you're baking. Then finally, you can use silken tofu as an egg replacement. This, again, kind of like that nut butter, is going to add some density to your baked good. So this is a great substitution for brownies if your brownie recipe has egg in it, or denser bakes like a cheesecake. You can use silken tofu to replace even like the cream cheese aspect and just make a cheesecake with straight tofu. Then finally, dairy. For the most part, in most baked goods, you can substitute any recipe that calls for regular cow's milk dairy with any non-dairy milk, and caveat that should be unsweetened non-dairy milk. The only thing you want to keep in mind is the flavor of the non-dairy milk that you are using. So some of our non-dairy milks, like a oat milk or a rice milk, tend to be a little bit sweeter, even if they don't have added sugar in them. Whereas our soy milks tend to be a little bit more on the savory side. So if you're making a savory baked good, like a biscuit or a roll, and the recipe calls for some milk, you might want to opt for that soy milk. But if you're doing a muffin or something that's going to be on the sweeter side, then maybe that oat milk is a good option. If you are going to use the oat milk, note that it does have a slightly higher sugar content naturally than some of the other non-dairy milks. So you're going to want to reduce the sugar content of your baked good. And you also want to keep in mind, because that oat milk has a little bit more sugar, you're going to get more of that Maillard reaction, so that browning. So some of your baked good might turn out a little bit on the darker side than if you were using regular cow's milk dairy. So just keep that in mind as you're playing around with the different types of milks you want to use. And then finally, if you have a recipe that calls for buttermilk, you can use any non-dairy milk plus 1 tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar, and that will help accomplish the role of the buttermilk in the baked good. So just mix your non-dairy milk, the lemon juice or vinegar together, let it sit for a few minutes, and then use it in the recipe just like you would your regular buttermilk. All right, so we understand a little bit of the science of our baked goods. We've got some ideas for some swaps. Let's get into the kitchen and start putting into practice what we just learned. All right, so everyone should be able to see this metal bowl here on the screen. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. All right. So we are going to start with a carrot apple muffin. This is a recipe that we've adapted from Minimalist Baker. It's a blog that has a ton of plant-forward recipes, from savory entrees to delicious baked goods. So today we're going to start with that flax egg in here. So we're going to start by mixing some liquid ingredients and then adding in our dry ingredients. One thing I want you to pay attention to as we make each of these recipes, pay attention to what the final batter looks like. So we're making a muffin, we're making a couple different cookies, and we're making a brownie. The consistency of each of those batters is slightly different. And if you can get a sense for what that final batter consistency should look like, that will help you as you're playing with swapping in some of these plant-forward substitutions. So then you can play around with your different moisture ingredients, your different binding ingredients, so that you get to that final batter product that looks like how it's supposed to look. So let's pay attention, and I'll try to remind you to look at the batter when we get to the end. So this is what our flax egg looks like. You can see it's kind of goopy, like what it would look like if we mixed together a whole egg, okay? This is the ground flax meal that we started with. So it's whole flax seeds that have been ground. You can grind your own. You can buy it pre-ground. It's easier to buy. I think I like to buy it pre-ground. You do just want to make sure that you store this in the fridge or freezer once you open it, because it has a lot of delicate fats, healthy fats in it that are susceptible to air, like oxygen, and they will degrade really quickly and go rancid. So if we keep them in a cold environment like the freezer, or fridge, they're less likely to spoil. So again, we've got 1.5 tablespoons of ground flax, and we added 4 tablespoons of water. We let this sit for about 5 minutes before we're using it here, and it's like that nice egg consistency. So that's going into our bowl. The ground flaxseed is a really nice addition. It's going to add some nuttiness, and it's also going to add a source of lignans, which are a phytoestrogen. And those phytoestrogens have been found to be cardioprotective and protective against the reoccurrence of certain kinds of cancer. We've got 1/3 cup of mashed banana. Remember that banana is adding some moisture. It's adding a distinct banana flavor. It's also adding some sweetness. I've got 1/4 cup of maple syrup. You could use honey here too if you wanted to. And honestly, I think this recipe, you could cut down the maple syrup even a little bit further. So if you wanted to do like 2 or 3 tablespoons of maple syrup instead of the 1/4 cup, I think that would be fine here. We've got 1/4 cup of nut butter, and this is replacing the original recipe called for an olive oil. So we're replacing that with some nut butter just to show how we can do that. We've got a 1/2 cup of applesauce. This is an unsweetened applesauce that's adding moisture. It's adding some distinct apple flavor. This recipe turns out with a lot of nice fall flavors, so it's great for this time of year. If you don't have unsweetened applesauce, you could also grate a small apple, finely grate a small apple, and throw that in here as well. We're just going to give this a little bit of a stir to get these liquid ingredients fully incorporated. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And next I'm going to add, I've got 1/2 cup of brown sugar. Again, I think that with this recipe, you could cut this down to maybe 1/4 cup of brown sugar to reduce some of the sugar content. The sugar does add a little bit of structure, so just be mindful of that as you're mixing. Okay, I've got 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to use my whisk here because my brown sugar was a little chunky, and this is going to help me incorporate it a little bit better. If you don't have a whisk, a fork works really well. Whisks do help with incorporating more air into your baked goods, so it can be a helpful tool for supporting the leavening process. All right, we've got a 1/2 cup of oat milk. This is unsweetened oat milk. This is another reason, because we're using the oat milk, why I think you could, if you choose to use oat milk, cut down a little bit on that brown sugar and the maple syrup. We've got 2/3 cup of rolled oats. Remember, those rolled oats are a whole grain. Getting some good soluble fiber. That's the fiber that helps us mop up cholesterol. We've got a 1/2 cup of almond meal. So this is just ground raw almonds. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of protein, a little bit of calcium from those almonds. And again, the whisk in this case, because that almond meal is a little chunky, is helping me break up those chunks so that our batter is consistently mixed. All right. And then we've got 1 cup of, I'm using a gluten-free flour mix here because I'm gluten-free. But if you are not, I would use a whole wheat flour in this instance. This is a great way, again, that whole wheat flour, to get some more whole grain power, some more fiber, some more vitamins, some B vitamins and vitamin E get those when we're eating our whole grains. Okay, and then the final ingredient is 1 cup of packed shredded carrots. Okay, we're just gonna fold these in. And there you go. You could also switch this up a little bit. You could do shredded zucchini that has been kind of drained of its excess moisture. You could throw raisins in here, especially if you're reducing some of the sugar content. You could throw different types of nuts in here, so walnuts or pecans for some added texture and crunch. Those can be really nice as well. But that's our basic batter. So look at it, see how it's pretty liquid. It's kind of pourable. Okay, so we'll compare that to what our other batters look like in a minute. So now what you're going to do is you're going to put this into a muffin tin and you're going to bake it at 375 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes. And once you do that, you'll take them out of the oven and you'll get these beautiful, delicious little muffins. And you can see they turn out quite dark. And this might vary based on the oven that you have, the type of pan that you bake in, and whether, again, you choose to use that oat milk. I did for this recipe, so they turned a little bit darker. And then this is what their insides look like. So you can see nice and moist. These are really delicious, and then especially tasty with some nut butter on top of them. All right, so we're going to shift gears here. I'm going to clear away the muffin situation, and we're going to move on to our brownie. Okay, this is adapted from the Plant View cookbook. I think we've done a few recipes from that cookbook, but this is a fudgy avocado brownie. And we're going to start with that avocado. So I like to cut avocados, laying it down on its side. I'm taking my paring knife and I'm slicing through the stem end of the avocado halfway through that stem in the center until I feel the pit. Okay, and then I'm rotating around the equator here of that avocado as I'm pressing that knife into the pit until I return back to my starting place. And now I can make this nice little twist. I'm going to take my fork and scoop out my avocado. This is where we want to make sure that we've got a really ripe avocado. Get rid of my pit. That's going to help with the mashing. This avocado is a little bit harder than what I would like, but it's still gonna work for us. Okay, so now I'm just gonna take my fork and I'm gonna mash as best as I can. The smoother you mash your avocado, the smoother your batter is going to be. If you can't get it completely smooth, it's still going to be okay. It's still going to be delicious. But just try to get it as smooth as you can. If it's a hard avocado or the fork is difficult for your hands, you can use your potato masher, which is this handy dandy tool here. Okay, that works really well. Mashing up your avocado. You could also use your immersion blender. So remember, this is that tool right here. If you have one, again, a fork works just as well. You do not have to have either of those tools. But if you are looking to make it easier for yourself and you already have those tools, you can employ them here. Okay, so we've got our avocado. That's like fairly well mashed. I'm going to call that good enough. We're going to mix in, this is 3/4 cup of oat milk. I have got a 1/2 cup of maple syrup. Mix that together with my fork here. Just trying to get the somewhat incorporated. So you can see here, you can see a lot of the avocado chunks. Again, This is where that immersion blender could come in handy if you want this to be smoothed out. I've made this recipe many times, and leaving it just like this seems to work out just fine. Okay, so our final ingredients here. We have got 1 cup of flour, we've got half a cup of raw cocoa powder, and then we've got a half teaspoon of baking soda and a half teaspoon of sea salt. All of those are going to go into this bowl, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to sift it into here. So I'm using this wire mesh strainer to sift these dry ingredients into my bowl. And I'm doing that because if you notice, you see how it's kind of a little chunky. You can see some of the clumps, and I want this batter to be as smooth as possible so that I don't get any of the dry ingredients that aren't moistened by my wet ingredients. I don't know if you've ever bitten into a brownie or a muffin and there's unmixed batter and you just kind of get that like dry chalkiness. So by sifting your ingredients, you can make sure that the dry particles are, or the dry ingredients are in smaller particles, and then they're more likely to incorporate evenly into your wet. So you just sift. You can see it's kind of like I'm making snow. I guess maybe I shouldn't have mentioned snow. I know we're trying not to think about that too much because it's coming soon. But I'm also making a little bit of a mess, but it's not baking, I guess, unless you're making a mess. So we're just going to sift this until everything goes through. This is a fun activity too for kids to do. Again, they are likely to make a little bit of a mess, but I think they enjoy watching the flour and the other dry ingredients kind of change into this fun snow-like texture. Okay, so you're just going to keep going. See how I've got these little like chunks? This is exactly why we're doing this. I'm going to keep going until all of those are gone or mostly gone. Okay, that's good enough. Not missing out on too much there, so we're going to set that aside. And now we're going to mix everything together here until our dry ingredients are fully incorporated into our wet ingredients. I'm going to try to do this slowly so I don't get too much more of our dry ingredients on the counter. And I'm just trying to mix until I don't see any more dry pockets here. So it might take a second, and that's okay. If you have a hand mixer, you could use a hand mixer here. You could put this into your stand mixer if you wanted to. But again, it works just as well with this spatula. Okay, so we're getting closer, almost there, but I still see some dry bits. And you can see some of the avocado right coming through in this batter, right? Some of the green flecks. You will not see it once this is baked off, so don't worry about it. And you definitely won't taste it either in this dish. So the avocado, it's a nice way to add some healthy monounsaturated fats. Those are the health promoting fats without having to use a processed oil. Okay, so that's kind of the batter. So do you see how it's like, oh, it's a lot thicker and kind of stickier than our muffin batter was? So here's that muffin batter. It's a lot wetter, the muffin batter, than compared to my sticky brownie batter. So pay attention to those differences, okay? So you can keep that in mind as you're making your own baked creation. Now to prepare this for baking, I got an 8 by 8 inch baking dish. Mine just happens to be glass. And I've got parchment paper. So parchment paper is a good tool for cutting down on oil needed for greasing and for making cleanup really easy when we're baking. Parchment paper is just paper that's lined with some food grade silicone. It is different than wax paper. Wax paper is coated with wax. Do not use it in the oven. That wax will melt off and get into your food. So you want to make sure that if you're lining a baking dish with anything, it's parchment paper. Okay, so now we just take our batter, put that parchment paper, or excuse me, put that batter on top of our parchment paper. We spread this around. And again, this is thick, so the parchment paper might move. That's okay. Just try to hang on to it with one hand. Okay. Just gonna kind of rotate this around as I move. This batter is really sticky, so you're gonna get it on the back of your spatula, and that's okay. Because you can lick this spatula or give it to your kid to lick. And the nice thing, because we're not using any raw eggs, this is perfectly safe to eat, just like this. Okay, so now we've got our batter in there. I have got half a cup of chocolate chips, dark chocolate chips. I'm going to sprinkle those on the top here, try to evenly spread those out so everybody gets some chocolate love in their brownie bites. And you could also fold in those chocolate chips to incorporate them in throughout the batter. That's really, really nice to do as well. I just chose to put them on top today. So we've got that. We're going to put that in the oven, 375 degrees for about 40 minutes. Now, your oven might vary, so you want to check it. Basically, what you're looking for is just to have a toothpick come out of the center cleanly. This is what it'll look like when you take it out of the oven. You can't see any of that green, no avocado in there. You're just getting the beautiful chocolate, and these are delicious brownies. No one will know that there's avocado in them, promise. Okay, so next we are going to work on our cookie recipes. I'm gonna clean up our counter here a little bit. So we've got 2 cookie recipes that we're working on. We've got a kind of like if you've ever had a Russian tea cake cookie, I feel like that's kind of a common one a lot of people make around the holidays. And then we're going to do a take on a chocolate chip cookie. So our first one is that almond cookie. And we're going to start with that aquafaba that I was talking about. So this is what the liquid off the can of a chickpea looks like. You can see it's already kind of thick. It almost looks like an egg white already. So we've got for this recipe a 1/4 cup of aquafaba, and we're just going to whip it for a minute or two until it gets really nice and frothy. And you'll be amazed to see how much like an egg white it behaves. So I'm using my whisk. You can use a fork here instead of the whisk if you do not have a whisk. The whisk is going to help you incorporate more air into this than the fork will. You're going to have to work a little bit harder if you're using the fork. So totally possible, but just know that it might be a little bit more challenging. So I'm just going to whisk away. I sometimes find it easier, especially with this quantity of liquid, to tilt my bowl. Okay, so you can see some of those bubbles starting to form. And the reason that we're using the aquafaba and we're doing this whipping is because we want those air bubbles. We want to be able to fold this into our baked good so that it's a little bit lighter and fluffier, not quite as dense. Okay, that's looking pretty good to me. So nice and foamy. Okay, I'm gonna set that aside for a second. And now we're gonna move on to our other ingredients. So I've got 2 1/4 cups of almond meal. So again, this is just ground almonds. You can get blanched, unblanched. Blanched just means that there's no skin on them. So it's usually a lighter color like what you can see here. If you get the unblanched, it's going to be slightly darker. That's the main difference. And then we've got 2/3 cup of sugar. Oh, I already sifted the almond flour if I didn't say that. So 2/3 cup. And almond flour, almond meal, interchangeable. Just it's like potato, basically. All right, so I'm going to mix this together a little bit so that my dry ingredients are evenly incorporated. And you're going to be amazed because the only liquid that we're adding here is that 1/4 cup of aquafaba that we mixed. So I'm going to mix that in here. I'm going to take my spatula and make sure I get all of the aquafaba. And now I'm going to mix until I get most of my dry ingredients wetted. So this batter is a little bit drier than most cookie batter. So just keep that in mind as you're mixing it. But that's actually about what I'm looking for, and this will stick together. We're going to roll these into some round circles, some spheres, about 3 centimeters or about 1 inch. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. I'm going to put on some gloves so that we can roll these. I'm gonna also bring over, I've got a sheet tray here. So this is a sheet tray with that parchment paper on it. Okay. And now what I'm gonna do, I've got a bowl of slivered almonds. Okay. I'm gonna take, I'm pinching a little bit of that dough. Again, I'm going for about a 1 inch ball here, so about that size. And then I'm gonna just kind of roll it in these slivered almonds, flaked almonds. You can kind of use your hands to press them in if they're not sticking. And then I'm going to place that on my sheet tray and just kind of press down. You could also, just kind of top it with some of the almonds. That works too. So you're going to, oops, you can't really see that, can you? There you go. We'll do that again. I'm making the ball, just kind of rolling it in the flaked almonds, putting it on my sheet tray, and then just kind of flattening it a little bit, and you can top it with some more almonds if you want to. Okay, now then this goes into the oven. It's a 350-degree oven for 12 to 15 minutes, depending on your oven temperature. Your oven, you may need shorter, you may need a little bit longer. So just check it after about 10 minutes to make sure they're not getting overly brown. Once you take them out of the oven, you are going to get these beautifully browned, delicious cookies. These are great with a cup of tea because they're a little bit on the drier side. They are pretty sweet, so keep that in mind. There's a significant amount of sugar in them, so keep that in mind as you're consuming them as well. But they're a really nice, tasty treat, like I said, with that cup of tea or just on their own. All right, final recipe is a tahini chocolate chip cookie. So most of us have had a chocolate chip cookie, but this recipe uses tahini, which is ground sesame seed paste, and some sea salt to give it a little bit of a savory take, and it is delicious. Highly recommend giving this a try. So we're going to start with that 1/2 cup of tahini. Okay, so this is replacing, this is our fat source. Tahini is ground sesame seeds. So this is basically like to sesame what peanut butter is to peanuts. And ground sesame has a ton of calcium in it, so it's a great source of plant-based calcium. I am adding a 1/3 cup of maple syrup. And then I've got a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And I'm just going to mix that together until it's mostly incorporated. Guess I don't need my gloves anymore. I could take those off. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. And now I'm just adding my dry ingredients. So I've got 1 cup of oat flour. You could use a whole wheat flour here as well. This is just, and if you don't have oat flour, you can buy it at the grocery store, but I just ground up some whole rolled oats in a coffee grinder. You could do it in a food processor, and I just did that until I got 1 cup. So we're adding that. So nice whole grain, and an example of a different kind of flour that you can use. This also makes this recipe gluten-free. And actually, all of these recipes can be made gluten-free, which is nice if you're trying to appeal to different food sensitivities or allergies. Okay, so I've got that oat in there. Now I've got a half teaspoon of baking powder and a half teaspoon of some salt. Right. I'm gonna mix all of that until it's incorporated. Okay. So you can see this cookie batter is it's kind of like our brownie. It's not quite as thick and sticky. It has a little bit more moisture to it than our brownie batter did, but it's not quite as wet as that muffin batter was. All right, and then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of dark chocolate chips and just fold those in. If you're using a hand mixer or a stand mixer for any of these recipes that call for adding the chocolate chips, incorporate all of your ingredients and then use a spatula to fold the chocolate chips in as your final step. Okay, now I'm going to grab my sheet tray. Okay, and then I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons. So I've got 1, 2 of dough, and I'm going to place that on my sheet tray. This recipe should make about 12 cookies. Okay, and you're going to space them evenly out on your sheet tray like that. And then you are going to stick them in a 400-degree oven and bake for 10 to 12 minutes. After they are done baking, they come out of the oven and they look just like this. Nice and beautiful and golden, and they're sweet with a little bit of saltiness from that sea salt. You could also, right when they come out of the oven, instead of incorporating the salt like I did when we were making this together, you could reserve that salt and like sprinkle it on top, especially if you've got some like flakier or larger crystal sized salt. That is really nice on top for that sweet salty kind of pairing that we really enjoy. So there you go. That's it. Well, that was our last recipe of the night. I'm actually going to bring everything out right here so you can see what we made all together. So you've got a great muffin, a brownie, and a couple different cookie options to hopefully get you started in thinking about some of the things that you can make for the celebration season, or just some tasty treats you can have in your back pocket for special occasions. The website is up with all of the recipes on it, so please go there to access the recipes. I will send a link in the class follow-up email as well. And don't forget, if you're a colleague and you've watched this class, to email that lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org for your insurance points, and feel welcome to send any questions that you might have about this or other classes to that email address as well. And with that, I hope you take good care, and I look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about celebration meals. Take good care and happy cooking.